Today I want to talk about baking when it gets a little more complex. This follows the last video I did on baking multiple materials to one texture plane. So if you haven't watched that, I suggest you do because we're moving onward from there. Many times we can get all of the information that we need onto one texture plane. That's a great thing. It makes it easier. It's wonderful, but not always. So as our objects get larger, as in buildings and things like that, oftentimes we need to have more than one texture per object. And that's what we're going to talk about today, how we can do that and bake them at the same time so they have exactly the same look. This is a little steampunk outdoor cafe for workers. It doesn't really matter what it is, but that is what it is. You can see that there's different sections. The bottom part we have over here, this is mapped. And if we switch into object mode, okay, that's this part here. And the top part is right here. Now, this is the roof, and this is a lantern that's over here. And this is the glass on the lantern, which we're going to do some tricky stuff with later on. I actually am going to add a couple more pieces to this, but I wanted to stop now since it was at a good spot and show this to you so that you could see what's going on. So here are the important things that we need to look at. This is one texture plane, and I'm going to be baking to a new image that I called main booth. Over here is our object, and we have three different materials. We have stone for the cart, rustic wood, and rough metal, and only three materials. If we go over here to this little icon, which shows you the UV maps, we can see that we have a map called UV map. That's the default name. Okay, all those things are important. If we go back over here to object mode, click on the roof, we can see that we have the roof and the lantern. If we go to here, it still says UV map. Each of the textures here in the bottom area have an image texture connected to them, and each of those say main booth, which is what our texture is here. So stone for cart, rustic wood, see it says main booth, and rough metal, main booth. All of those are the same. If we go and look at the roof, we have more materials here. Note that each one of these materials has a different name. Even if you use the same node setup, you can copy and paste those over so that they match. They have to have different names because each one has to be identified as a separate material for this process to work. Now I hope you have your thinking cap on because this is getting kind of complex. But here's what's happening. I added a little metal plate here where they're going to be able to cook, and I'm going to put a fire down there. I already have the fire made. It fits right over here in that empty spot because I really like to fill my texture planes up. I linked both the roof pieces and the lantern and the bottom. Everything's all in one piece now, including the lantern over here, which of course is not going to be where we want it when we upload. We're going to upload that individually. But let's look and see what happens. First of all, we now have 9 materials in this joined object, okay? This includes the lamp. We can only have 8 to upload or all sorts of bad things happen. The uploader is not a happy camper. Now I always plan to take the lamp and upload it separately, so that isn't any kind of a big deal or a surprise. But there is sort of a surprise that comes. Let's see what happened to the textures that we're going to bake to. All the textures that belong to roof, all these, the lantern, and including the new little metal piece here that's going to be the cooktop stove, all still go to roof. the textures that were on the bottom part here, now these textures are going to bake to a texture called roof point 001. So the texture that we're baking to, that name changed. And that's okay. We don't have to worry about that. What also happened, if we look at our list, now I'm going to have lots of stuff in here because I've been doing lots of things, so don't worry about that. But we've got roof and we've got roof 001. And it doesn't matter. We can go back and change the names if we want to. The reason why the name got changed on our image texture is because when we joined the roof parts, which had a map called UV map, and we joined the bottom part, which had a map called UV map, it made them into one map. Let's see what happened. They are stacked on top of each other. And if we go back over here and look, we still only have one UV map, but we have two layers in one map. One layer is going to bake to roof, and one layer is going to bake to roof point 001, or whatever you choose to rename that to. Okay, let's recap for a little bit, and then I want to show you one more very tricky thing while those brain cells are still working. Please feel free to come back and watch this over again because I know that there's a lot of information here and it could be very hard to understand the first time through. So we have an object with 9 materials, which we know we can't upload in one piece. They are all on one UV map now. One UV map called UV map, that's the default name. And if we want to, we can go back in here to our list of materials. We can make it so that none of them are selected, but we do want to be in edit mode. There we go. And we can go to Stone Cart and select. That shows you where that is. Then the next one on the bottom, if I remember correctly, was Rustic Wood. Select. And Rough Metal. Select. And that shows you everything that's on one texture plane. The rest of them are going to bake to roof 001. Now I'm going to show you how you can use a UV map node to do some very important things and get your textures just perfect. If you've been working in Blender any amount of time, you know that it's very easy to get a really ugly seam at the back of anything that's a cylinder. So like a vase, or in this case, the glass that's going to go in the lantern over here. Over here is the map that I've already got ready for this section of the glass. And if we just look at that, you can see that seam, hopefully. It's pretty pronounced. This is a tiling texture that I'm using, but of course, if we look back over here, this isn't filling up the whole width of the texture plane, and so consequently, you've got that ugly seam. It is no longer a tiling texture. There are some fancy ways, if you're very good and mathematical and super picky, that you can do this by using the mapping nodes, but there's a much easier way, and that's what we're going to look at right now. When you're doing this on your own, I suggest that you do it with something much simpler than this big complex build. And this point in the process would be a very good time to make sure that everything else is working besides your glass that we're going to fix, and that your textures are right and that your UV maps are correct. If you have to redo the UV maps after you do this, it gets a little messy, and while it is possible to do, it certainly isn't a good thing that you would need to do when you're starting to figure out how this process works. So that's my suggestion. You can do that or not as you wish, of course. So here we have our glass over here, and remember that this little piece of the UV map is part of the giant whole UV map, which is really the two layers, which contains everything. What we're going to do now is with just this part of the glass highlighted so that all you see is this, is we're going to make a new UV that is only connected to the glass piece. So remember, this is how you get there, this little triangle thing. Active data displayed. And that takes us down here. We're going to add a UV map. Now it's going to say UV map 0.001, and that's fine, but let's call it something a little more logical. So I'm going to call it UV map glass. So this UV map only goes with this, and it's really important that this is highlighted and only this isn't highlighted when you make the new UV map. Now we can go here and typically in my setup I have the mapping and the texture coordinate and all this here. We don't need that because we're going to do it a different way. So I'm going to delete those. Let's zoom in a little bit. And so here's our image texture, which in my case is called Dirty Glass. And this will eventually be transparent, of course, when it gets in world. What we're going to do is we're going to add input UV map. We're going to connect the purple dot to the purple dot. And then in here, we're going to choose UV map glass. And what that does is it's going to hook this UV map onto one that we're going to change. I'm going to say this one more time because it's kind of the key to the whole thing, and I don't want you to become confused any more than you need to. We are here doing the glass, and we have the UV map glass highlighted right here, okay? Down here, that is the UV map node that we're sending into our texture plane that's going to describe how this is going to work. Right now I'm looking at the texture that we're going to bake to, and in this case I could just leave it that way, but there are many times when you're using this method that you want to look at the texture that's going inside your UV map. So we can go down here and I can find Dirty Glass. It doesn't matter that it's a different size. This is a 512 and the other was a 1024. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this texture and I'm going to stretch it so that it goes all the way to both sides, and that will make it tiling inside this small texture plane that goes with the UV map. So right here, so I'm going to hit the S key, make it bigger. Woo! So I get kind of close. And then I'm going to zoom in, way in, and take this edge and make it go all the way over to get exactly as I can over here. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Looks like that's about as good as it's going to get. Okay, now if all goes well, see, there's no line anymore. Isn't that cool? Now before we bake, you have to be sure and go back to the regular UV map so that it looks like this, okay? Here's what it looks like now, this one, and here's what this one looks like, and that's the one you want to have active when it bakes. Of course, you want to have everything active when it bakes. I've gone ahead and done my test bake. I used a render of 20 over here, so it baked very quickly, but it lets you know whether you have everything correct and whether all the textures are going to show up. Before I did my test bake, I went up to the materials, and for each one of these I checked to make sure it was going to the right place and also that it was highlighted. It has to be highlighted or else it won't bake, and then you have to start all over again. Not a good plan. So my test bake went very well, and hopefully yours will too. I'm going to play around a little bit with the textures and the lighting, and then I will show you how it uploaded in World. Be sure and save as you go along, and go ahead and export your file when you get ready to upload. In my case, I'm going to have to take the lamps off before I export, but you probably won't have that issue with whatever you're working on.